There's a peculiar moment in human history we're living through now, one of those inflection points we only clearly recognize once we've passed through it. You've probably felt it. It's that strange feeling when you use an artificial intelligence tool and it does in seconds what would take you hours of work. It's that chill down your spine when you realize the quality of the result isn't just acceptable, but genuinely impressive, sometimes even better than what you could produce yourself. But what should really scare you isn't just that AI is getting better at its job. The real terror lies in the fact that absolutely no one, not governments, not companies, not you, is prepared for the structural collapse of society this will cause. And when I say no one, I mean it literally. There's no plan, there's no safety net, there's no consensus on what to do. We're walking with our eyes open towards an abyss, and most people are still debating whether the abyss even exists. Let's start with a brutal truth that needs to be stated bluntly. Artificial intelligence is no longer a futuristic promise. It's already here, already working, already replacing people. Not in distant laboratories or academic experiments, but in the real world, right now, at this very moment. As you read these words, someone somewhere on the planet is being informed that their department is being restructured, that their services are no longer needed, that a new technological solution will take over their functions. And here's the crucial detail. In the vast majority of cases, this replacement isn't happening because the person was incompetent. It's happening because mathematics is unforgiving. An AI system doesn't charge a monthly salary. It doesn't take vacations. It doesn't get sick. It doesn't ask for a raise. It doesn't create labor disputes. It doesn't need constant training. And, increasingly, it delivers results superior to those of highly qualified human professionals. The fundamental problem that nobody is really addressing is that this is not a typical technological transition. It's not like the invention of the printing press, which eliminated copyists but created an entire publishing industry. It's not like the Industrial Revolution, which replaced hand weavers but created millions of factory jobs. It's not like the digital age, which transformed industries but opened up entirely new fields of work. This revolution is different in its essential nature because we are creating synthetic intelligence that can learn any cognitive task a human can perform. When you create a machine that can think, learn, and adapt, you're not just replacing human muscles or even specific skills. You're replacing the very human capacity to add economic value through mental labor. Let me be even more specific about what this means in practice. A lawyer spends years studying, accumulates decades of experience, and develops intuition about complex cases. Now, there is an AI system that can read and understand millions of legal cases, identify relevant precedents, suggest strategies, draft documents with impeccable technical precision, and do all this in a fraction of the time and cost. A doctor dedicates their life to understanding the human body, diagnosing diseases, and saving lives. AI systems already diagnose cancer from medical images with accuracy rates higher than human specialists because they can process patterns in millions of cases that no human brain could store. A programmer learns languages, frameworks, and software architectures. AI tools now generate functional code, debug errors, and even explain what the code does in simple language. The list goes on in virtually every profession you can imagine. But here's where we get to the truly dark side of this story, the part that almost no one is discussing with the necessary seriousness. When you replace human labor on a massive scale, you're not just changing how products are made or services are delivered. You're destroying the very structure that keeps our civilization functioning. Our entire economy, our social systems, our political organization, all of it was built on a fundamental premise. People work, they get paid, they use those wages to consume goods and services, and that cycle keeps everything running. When you break that chain at one point, the entire system begins to collapse. And we're not talking about breaking it at one point. We're talking about breaking it at hundreds of points simultaneously, at accelerated speed, without any coherent plan for how to deal with the consequences. Think about the practical implications of this for a moment. When millions of people lose their jobs to automation, they have no income. Without income, they can't pay rent or mortgage. The housing market goes into crisis. They can't buy products. Companies that depend on consumers start to go bankrupt. This creates more unemployment. It's a self-perpetuating downward spiral. Our social security systems were designed to deal with temporary unemployment, with recessions that eventually recover, with gradual transitions between economic sectors. They were not designed and do not have the capacity to deal with permanent and massive displacement of labor. The numbers simply don't add up. If 40 or 50% of the population is permanently unemployed because their skills no longer have economic value, where does the money come from to support them? From taxes on whom? On the companies that have automated? But these companies have global mobility and can easily move operations to jurisdictions with favorable taxation. The psychological and social dimension of this collapse is perhaps even more terrifying than the economic one. Work is not just a source of income for most people. It's identity, it's purpose, it's structure for daily life. It's how you respond when someone asks who you are. It's how you assess your own worth. It's community, social connection, a sense of contributing to something bigger than yourself. When you remove that from tens of millions of people simultaneously, you're not just creating an economic crisis. You're creating an existential crisis of unprecedented proportions. What happens to the mental health of a society when entire generations discover they are not needed, that they have no role to play, that they have no way to contribute? We already see signs of this in communities that have lost their core industries. Dramatic increases in suicides, substance abuse, family disintegration, violence. And that was just with localized economic displacement. Now imagine this happening simultaneously on a global scale. Political systems are also unprepared to absorb the shock that is coming. Liberal democracies were built on the premise of a stable and broad middle class with an interest in preserving the system. When this middle class is economically destroyed, when people lose hope in social mobility, when they feel that the system no longer works for them, they become susceptible to extremist narratives. We have seen this repeatedly in history. Prolonged economic crises create political instability, the rise of demagogues, sometimes even the total collapse of political systems. And we are talking about an economic crisis that is not cyclical, that will not recover on its own, that has no historical precedent in terms of scale and nature. The pressure this will place on democratic institutions is almost impossible to overstate. Economic inequality, already a serious problem, is about to explode into almost feudal proportions. A small elite that controls AI technology, that owns the algorithms, the data centers, the digital infrastructure, this elite will accumulate wealth on scales that are difficult to comprehend. Because once you have AI systems running, the marginal cost of producing more is essentially zero. You can scale infinitely without needing to hire more people. So you have companies that generate trillions in value with teams of a few hundred or even dozens of people. This wealth doesn't naturally distribute throughout the economy the way it did when companies needed thousands or millions of workers. It remains concentrated in a tiny group. And on the other side, you have masses of people whose skills simply no longer have market value, not for lack of effort or ability, but because the economy no longer needs more than they can offer. Now you might be thinking, surely there are proposals, solutions, and plans being discussed by intelligent people, right? And yes, there are. Universal basic income is the most common proposal. The idea is that everyone receives a monthly amount sufficient for basic needs, regardless of employment. But consider the practical implications of this. Where does the money come from? From taxes on automated companies? Will they accept this peacefully, or will they use their enormous economic power to influence politics and regulation in their favor? How do you determine the value of this basic income? Too low, and people cannot live with dignity. Too high, and the system becomes unsustainable. More importantly, how do you implement this globally when different countries have different levels of development, different cultures and different political systems? And even if you manage to solve all these practical challenges, what happens to a sense of purpose, identity and meaning when work is no longer part of life? The speed of transformation makes everything even more problematic. Massive social and economic changes typically happen over generations. This allows time for adaptation, for the development of new social norms, for the evolution of institutions. But AI is advancing at an exponential rate. What was impressive last year seems primitive now. What seems impossible today may be reality in months. Human society does not evolve at an exponential rate. We change slowly, gradually. Our institutions are deliberately designed to be stable, resistant to rapid change. There is a fundamental imbalance between the speed of technological change and the speed of social adaptation. And this imbalance is becoming a dangerous divergence. The education sector faces an existential crisis that is simultaneously urgent and ignored. What are we teaching children today when we don't know what skills will be relevant when they enter the job market? How are we preparing young people for careers that may not exist in a decade? The current education system was designed for the industrial age, focusing on conformity, memorization, and the execution of standardized tasks. Exactly the things machines do better than humans. We need to be teaching deep critical thinking, genuine creativity, sophisticated emotional intelligence, and the ability to navigate ambiguity and constant change. But transforming massive, bureaucratic education systems takes decades, and we don't have that time. We are producing entire generations prepared for a world of work that will no longer exist when they reach it. International tensions will also intensify in dangerous ways. Countries that manage to develop and control advanced AI technology will have enormous strategic, economic, and military advantages. This creates incentives for technological arms races, espionage, and conflict. Countries that fall behind will face economic marginalization and may become desperate. Inequality is not only within countries, but between countries. Developed nations have more resources to manage the transition, although still not enough. Developing countries may see their traditional paths to prosperity completely blocked. If manufacturing can be fully automated, what is the advantage of cheap labor? The resulting migratory pressure could be massive, creating unprecedented political tensions. The problem with this whole situation is that recognizing its gravity and acting appropriately would require political courage and long-term vision that simply don't exist in our current systems. Politicians are incentivized to focus on short election cycles. Companies are pressured by quarterly profits. Individuals are busy surviving day to day. Nobody has the incentive or capacity to do the necessary long-term planning. And even if some people in positions of power recognize the gravity of the situation, implementing solutions would require international cooperation on an unprecedented scale, sacrificing short-term interests for long-term benefits and social consensus on deeply controversial issues. The likelihood of all this happening in a coordinated and timely manner is essentially zero. So we are walking with relatively open eyes towards a future of massive economic displacement, profound social instability, potential institutional collapse, the growth of political extremism, epidemic mental health crises, and inequality at obscene levels, and there is no plan. There are some thinkers, some researchers, some organizations trying to sound the alarm, trying to propose solutions, but they are voices on the periphery, not at the center of power and decision-making. The mainstream conversation is still in the phase of denying that the problem is so serious, of believing that somehow the market will self-correct, of trusting that new categories of jobs will emerge as happened in the past. But this is not the past. The nature of this technological revolution is fundamentally different. For the first time in history, we are creating technology that can potentially do any cognitive task that humans do, and do it better. We are not just replacing physical strength or specific skills. We are replacing thought, judgment, creativity, the very things that made us economically valuable in the post-industrial age. And we have no substitute. There is no obvious next frontier where human labor will still be needed and valuable on a scale sufficient to employ billions of people. The window for proactive preparation is closing rapidly. With each passing day, without coordinated and serious action, the options become more limited and the consequences more severe. Eventually, we will reach a point where we are merely reacting to crises as they erupt, without the capacity to truly manage the transition in an orderly fashion. And once we enter this constant crisis management mode, the chances of truly bad outcomes, including potential large-scale social collapse, increase dramatically. The most frustrating aspect of all this is that technology itself is not inherently evil. AI has incredible potential to solve problems, cure diseases, and expand human knowledge. In an ideal world, we could use this technology to free humans from tedious work, to create abundance, to allow people to focus on creativity, relationships, and personal growth. But achieving this optimistic outcome would require careful planning, equitable distribution of benefits, and a fundamental redesign of economic and social systems, and we simply aren't doing that. We are letting the market guide the transition, and the market doesn't care about social consequences. The market optimizes for efficiency and profit, not for human well-being or social stability. Technology companies developing AI often promote optimistic narratives about a brighter future, but their actions reveal different priorities. They are in fierce competition, racing to develop and implement more advanced capabilities as quickly as possible. Considerations of social impact are secondary at best, and these companies have enormous power to shape policy and public opinion. They fund think tanks, lobbyists, and political campaigns. They control communication platforms where public discourse takes place. They have every incentive to minimize concerns and resist regulations that might slow their growth. The general population is in a state of denial, largely because the alternative is simply too daunting to face. It's much more comfortable to believe that you're special, that your specific job requires something unique that machines will never replicate, that somehow you'll be among the few who navigate this transition successfully. Nobody wants to believe that they might become economically obsolete, that years of education and experience might become irrelevant. So we create reassuring narratives, focus on aspects of AI that seem benign or useful, and avoid seriously thinking about long-term implications. Academic institutions, which should be leading serious discussions on these issues, are largely trapped within their own structures and incentives. Researchers are rewarded for publications, not for social impact. Universities compete for funding and prestige. There are some programs and centers focused on the ethics and social impact of AI, but they are marginal compared to the vast resources being invested in developing technical capabilities. And even within these spaces, there is much abstract academic debate and relatively little concrete action or influence on real policy. The media covers AI episodically, focusing on impressive demonstrations or human interest stories, but rarely providing the in-depth, sustained coverage the subject deserves. This is partly because it's a complex and technical topic that's difficult to explain, partly because apocalyptic narratives can seem exaggerated or sensationalist, partly because tech companies are major advertisers and wield influence. The result is that most people have a superficial awareness that AI is important, but no real understanding of how transformative and potentially devastating this technology will be for their lives. Governments are lagging behind and disoriented. Some countries have made moves toward regulation, but in a fragmented and generally weak way. The global nature of technology means that national regulation has limited effectiveness. Companies can simply move operations to more permissive jurisdictions. Meaningful international cooperation is rare and difficult on any issue, even more so on something as economically valuable as AI. Every country wants the competitive advantages that AI offers and is afraid of falling behind. This creates a prisoner's dilemma, where everyone would be better served by a coordinated and cautious approach. But no one wants to be the first to slow down while others continue to accelerate. The cruel irony of this whole situation is that we could, in theory, use AI to help solve the problems that AI is creating. Advanced systems could help model economic transitions, identify viable policy solutions, and optimize the implementation of social programs. But this would require the political will to ask these questions and act on the answers. And we are back to the fundamental problem of a lack of will or capacity to face the situation with the necessary seriousness. The clock is ticking. Every advance in AI capabilities accelerates the timeline. Each wave of automation makes the next easier. Every company that successfully implements massive workforce reduction through AI creates competitive pressure for others to do the same. It's a self-accelerating dynamic, and we're only in the early stages. What we've seen so far is just the beginning. The capabilities that will be developed in the next 5 years will make current tools seem primitive, and we haven't even begun to seriously grapple with the implications of what already exists. So yes, AI will do what you do, and it will do it better. That's practically certain at this point for the vast majority of professions. But the real dark side, the truly terrifying aspect of this story, is that nobody is prepared for the consequences. Not you individually, not companies, not governments, not society as a whole. There is no adequate plan. There is no consensus on the way forward. There is no coordination or cooperation on the necessary scale. We are collectively failing to do what needs to be done, and the consequences of that failure will be measured in human suffering on a massive scale. The challenge ahead of us is not just technological or economic, it is existential, touching on the most fundamental questions about how we organize society, how we assign value, how we give meaning to our lives. And we are facing this existential challenge with tools and thought structures that were developed for a completely different world. A world that is rapidly disappearing in the rearview mirror as we accelerate toward a future for which we have no map.